Hey tech fans, welcome back to Mackie Tech, and a question for you. How many times have you tried to dual boot Windows on the same drive as Windows, only to end up breaking your Windows or Linux boot? For me, it's more often than I'd like to admit. But rest assured, in today's part 3 of our Switch to Linux series, we're going to show you how to safely dual boot Linux on the same hard drive or SSD as your existing Windows install without breaking anything. And for this demo, we're going to be using our tried and true 10-year-old Dell Optiplex from part 2 of this series. First, we'll prepare Windows and the storage drive, then tweak the BIOS, and finally install Linux. So let's jump in. Okay, so here we are in our Windows 10 install on our Dell Optiplex. And we want to make sure that we have our distro of choice already flashed to our USB disk using Belena Etcher or Ventoy. And as you can see here, if I point to my little E drive on my Dell, I have 3 different distros: Fedora, Linux Mint Mate, and Zorin OS 18. So we're going to be going with Linux Mint Mate today. To get started, what we're going to do is, as I mentioned, we're going to prepare our Windows drive. And to do that, we need to go into the drive manager, and we'll go down to the start menu and right click and go to disk manager. Let that come up. And we have a number of different drives on here. So this is our C drive right here. And you can see it's formatted as formatted as NTFS. Right here, disk 2, that's our USB. So we're going to be allocating free space in this specific boot drive here. So we're going to right click on it and go to shrink volume. And it's going to bring up our options. And so we want to enter the space to shrink. And this is going to vary depending on your needs and how much how big your hard drive is, those types of things. So don't shrink it more than you can. My disk is a little light. It's about 240 gigabytes. That's fine, but for our purposes, usually anywhere from 50 to 100 gigabytes is completely fine for a Linux install. So we're going to do 100 gigabytes. And so in that case, it wants it to be put in megabytes. So we're going to put in 100,000. So put in 100,000. And that's going to leave us with 128 gigabytes left, as you can see below that. So we'll click on shrink, and it's going to do its magic, and it's done. So now we have, if we look, we see we have 98.29 gigabytes unallocated. Now the important thing here is do not format this. Don't create a drive letter. Don't do anything. We're done with this step, and we can safely close out of this. And now what we're going to do is we're going to disable Windows hibernation, aka Windows fast boot. And the reason why we're going to disable it is that when it's enabled and you reboot your system, even with a Linux install, what it does is it saves the Windows kernel to the hard drive so it can boot up faster next time. And what that can do is that Windows will consider that part of the drive to be still available and still in use. So the next time you try to boot into another OS like Linux, and you might try to save a file to the Windows partition, Windows will freak out, and it'll cause the boot sector to get all screwed up and all sorts of nastiness. So, and honestly, these days with computers and SSD drives, you're only saving a second or two with hibernation, so you really don't need it. And there are 2 ways to do it. There is the PowerShell way, which we're going to show you, which is basically bulletproof. And you can also use what's called the control panel. I'll leave both in my cheat sheet. The PowerShell is more reliable, so we're going to go with that. So to open up PowerShell, you go down to the start menu down here and type in power, and then you'll see where it has Windows PowerShell, and you want to right click and go to run as administrator and say yes. And so now we're going to type in a quick command, which will be powercfg/h space OFF. Enter, and we're done. That's all you got to do. Also, the cool thing this does is that it will prevent Windows updates from turning on Windows hibernation, again, because Microsoft can't resist controlling our lives on our computers and doing things we don't want. There is a small chance that if you have a major update to your Windows that it will be re-enabled. So you might want to come back in here if there is a big update, whether you wanted it to be there or not, and type in this command to make sure that it isn't turned on again. And with that done, we'll go ahead and close this. And we already have our USB disk in our Dell computer, so we're going to reboot. And before we do the install of Linux, we're going to do a couple quick tweaks of the BIOS, and then we'll go from there. So I'm going to power, restart. Okay, so I'm going to go into BIOS setup real quick. So here we are in our BIOS, and one of the things that I would recommend that you do is we're going to disable fast boot in the BIOS, and it can be called different things depending on what type of a computer you have. I don't happen to have an option for it in my system, but in general, it'll be under your boot options. It'll usually be under boot or performance. So the reason why we're doing this is that when you have the fast boot turned on, what it tends to do is it will ignore boot detection. It sometimes ignores different drivers, and it makes it quicker to boot into Windows. So by disabling that, we're going to make that even more bulletproof so we can have a clear boot process. The other thing that you might want to do is to make sure that your boot is UEFI. You don't want to be booting in legacy. And I would also recommend you turn off secure boot. You might not need to, depending on what distro you're dealing with. I would just turn it off to be safe. With that done, we're going to put our USB ahead of our Windows boot manager here under our boot sequence because we want the system to boot off of our USB drive. So I'm going to click on apply, and then I'm going to click on exit, and it will reboot. Okay, so here we are in Ventoy. So we're going to go down to Linux Mint Mate and hit enter, and we're going to say normal mode, and we're going to say start Linux Mint Mate, and we'll just fast forward through this real quick. So here we are in our Linux Mate instance. So from here, we'll go ahead and double click on install Linux Mint, and we're going to select English, and we'll select English again for our keyboard layout. And we'll go ahead and connect to a Wi-Fi network just so we have it when we boot up next time. It'll also install a bunch of drivers and blah, 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 blah. Okay, we got a connection. That's fantastic. So we'll click on continue. We're just going to skip by this just for the purposes of this demo. Okay, so here we are. So this is the installation type that we want to be very conscientious of. So we're going to go with the first option, which is install Windows Mint alongside Windows Boot Manager, which essentially means install next to Windows. Now this might be worded differently depending on what distro you're installing. Sometimes it might be alongside existing OS, or it might say install in the unallocated space. Just depends on the distro. They all mean the same thing. The other thing is that on most GNOME-based desktops, this is going to be an automated process. Other distros might want you to specify the boot partitions for the root and the bootloader. So in this case, and I'll put this in the cheat sheet, but generally speaking, you want to make sure that you have anywhere from 30 to 50 gigabytes for the root partition at least, or you can use the whole thing if you want to. And then for the EFI, you want to use the existing partition that's there. Whatever you do, do not delete the EFI partition because you'll screw everything up. For the EFI partition, I'll usually say anywhere from 300 to 500 megabytes, might be less, might be more. Just go with it, and Linux will take care of the rest. But generally speaking, most of them will go ahead and automate the whole process. So I will go ahead and select install now. And so here it's just asking me to confirm. I'm going to say yes. And it wants me to tell it its region. That's fine, Chicago. And we'll put in our user, Mac. Click continue. And we're going to skip by this copying file stuff because that's not very exciting. Okay, so this is the bootloader that I wanted to get to. What this means is that the Linux GRUB bootloader is now our default bootloader. As you can see, we can scroll down to where it says Windows bootloader. It's still there, but Linux is going to be the default one going forward because GRUB can handle both OSs. Windows bootloader only works for Windows. So Linux has put its bootloader alongside of our Windows one, just as a heads up. So let's go ahead and boot into Linux and make sure everything is copacetic. All right, so here we are in Linux. and we're going to go into our terminal and just do an lsblk. So under BSLK, we have, this is our 240 gigabyte or so hard drive that we used. Here is our Windows partition, the 125 gigabyte one. Here is the UEFI partition that Linux created for itself. So we were right around the correct amount of space that it needed. And here is the Linux partition here. Oops. That is the root partition right there, the 97.8 gigabytes. So just to be sure, let's close this out and open up our file manager. This is our Windows partition right here. I wouldn't mess with it, but just so you know that it's still there. It hasn't gone anywhere. And here is our Linux one here. So everything is working just fine. So let's go ahead and boot back into Windows. Make sure that that works. So we'll go down to the Start menu down here and go to Quit and go to Restart. Okay, so we'll go into Windows Boot Manager, hit Enter. That is going to take off into our Windows. And this is off the same SSD drive, so SSD is going to be very, very quick. All right, and here we are back in Windows, so everything's fine. So we'll open up our file manager, and we'll go to this PC. And Windows probably can't see the Linux boot partition, which is fine. But just so you can see, this is the existing one. Remember, we trimmed it down to about 125 gigabytes. Perfectly fine. And if we go into our disk management, here is the Linux partition. Here is the UEFI partition that it created. And here's the Windows one. And so that's it. We can see that the drive is fine. Everything is working as expected. In an upcoming video, I will be showing how to do a third option for installing Linux on a separate hard drive, but that's going to conclude it for this session. As a reminder, make sure you periodically run the PowerShell command we visited in Windows to make sure hibernation is still disabled. And as always, I will be posting a cheat sheet for this tutorial in my free Patreon. And with that, that is going to wrap up this video series. If you found this tutorial helpful, please give it a like and drop me your comments or thoughts. And make sure you are subscribed to Mackie Tech. Also consider supporting me by visiting my Patreon or joining my YouTube membership if you do want some custom emojis to use in the comment section. As always, a special shout out to my Patreon supporters. You know who you are. Thank you very much. And a sincere thank you to all of you for watching, and we will talk to you again very soon.